Hello and welcome to today's podcast. I'm Paul Tunner, the founder of Pharma Forum, and really pleased to welcome Elias Dubka, Managing Director of Angelini Ventures today. We're going to talk about his work at Angelini Ventures. And Elias, it's great to speak with you today. Thanks for joining me.
Hi, Paul. Great to speak to you today.
Let's start with just a bit about your role and the organization, given the headline of kind of what you're doing and what that involves for you.
Sure. So I'm the managing director of Angelini Ventures. Angelini Ventures is a recently launched fund. It's a 300 million fund in healthcare. We operate mainly in Europe and North America and Israel. And we are on a path to invest in companies that we believe are transformational in healthcare, that have a long-term impact on how healthcare functions. And we do that by looking across digital health, life sciences, medical devices, smart solutions, where we are quite agnostic to how problems are solved, as long as it has an impact on unmet needs. I'm managing director alongside with Paolo Di Giorgio, who is also CEO. And we launched this adventure a few months ago, and we're excited to enter the space and invest in businesses that can change this ecosystem.
Fantastic. And I know you joined Angelini Ventures fairly recently. I'm always intrigued by people's background and the journey that's brought you there. So what's been your career path? Tell me what your journey's been.
Yeah, I'll try to find a way to concisely tell you about my career path, because I've taken a few hops and changed a few roles. But I started out as a research scientist. I was my very first work was working on the Human Genome Project. So I feel very honored in a way and privileged to have been part of that in the UK in Cambridge back in 99, 2001. And that really led me, at a time where a lot was changing. It was the time when Linux was coming and open source and high performance computing and all those things. So I became what at the time hardly existed, which was a bioinformatician. So somebody meddling with data in biology.
Yep.
Moved to Singapore, worked on launching a genome project here in Singapore, which was also kind of a flagship project for Asia, first genome project, first, again, bioinformatics computing project in the continent. I always was driven in my career path to have impact. So I wanted to get closer to the clinical space. And I started by coming back to Europe, working for the Telethon Foundation on rare diseases, still in the research space. Then in London, working at UCL and with Great Ormond Street Hospital and other organizations there, Queen Mary, on really starting to bring the first, applications of genomics to rare diseases and diagnosing kids with rare diseases. Then worked in San Raffaele Hospital, where we first brought the first gene therapy trials that were EMA approved. And again, I was heading up a genome center there, so we did a lot of work in the trials to look at safety, look at at improving those trials. So I then felt I needed to understand how what at the time seemed like the dark side, the pharma side, the industry side looked like, and how it worked. And so I moved to Boehringer Ingelheim Pharma. It was a fantastic journey of learning. I realized how much work goes into after an academic project shows some hope, how much work it takes to validate and really bring to validation and market, a solution. Worked with them for 5 years. It was also a time when BI was investing a lot in external innovation. So we invested in startups and labs around the world, from the West Coast to Japan. That really made me passionate about innovation, venture capital, and startups. I took on several roles in more than a dozen startup companies across, from biotech to quantum computing to very different things. And so I moved to Boston. I worked at Dana-Farber Cancer Institute, where I headed up data for operations and research, because there is always a lot of challenges in taking something that looks promising in research to the operational, daily life of a hospital. And then I joined a small startup that at the time was our supplier, that was Health Catalyst, which then quickly grew until we took it public in 2019. I had, again, an enormous honor and privilege to work with the leadership team there, with probably the best CEO I've ever so far worked with in my lifetime. Burton there, great culture, great company. And then after Health Catalyst went public, I moved mainly for love, for personal reasons, to Singapore. Took a sabbatical, regrouped, and I really wanted to build a sort of global, healthcare impact-driven fund. But I was approached by the Angelini family, who are very, driven by really great values, to build something that was quite similar to what I was thinking of setting out to do. And making a long story short, we worked on it for about a year and a half in various ways, and now together with Paolo Di Giorgio, who was at the time managing the venture arm of the Angelini Pharma, which is one of the subsidiaries of Angelini Industries, we launched Angelini Ventures, and so it's been a great journey up to here.
That's a great summary, and I love the diversity of your experience. I mean, you've clearly had that kind of digital data technology side. You've worked in big pharma, but you've also been very close to the patient and seen the impact this can have firsthand. And it's nice to hear how all of that is perhaps coming together in what you're doing now. Thanks for sharing that. And we're going to talk about Angelini Ventures and what you're doing in a moment. Before we go there, I do always like to ask if you can share something about you beyond work, any passions that you can share beyond work, and is there any application of that to your daily life at work?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I think actually daily passions are the only way to be meaningful at work. I mean, that's how I view it. And I think some of the best companies have that sort of culture, right? That if you have a good life, a balanced life, then you give your best at work.
Right.
And I would say, a bit like with my work, my passions have evolved over, and changed over time. Each of them teaches me something. I think, my path, for example, becoming, doing a yoga teacher training and doing yoga for many years was definitely transformational in bringing work-life balance. And I think it allows me to approach a lot of the work, projects, issues, challenges in a way that you look at your, teammates, your peers, or even, the startup founders in a different way. You look at, how they can succeed in a different way. So that's definitely, yoga and meditation are definitely, two aspects that are foundational to everything I do, and that have helped me a lot in approaching people. Something that is somewhere between work and in personal life is mentoring and coaching. Is something that I've really enjoyed doing over time and in different ways, and has given me a lot of very great personal moments and of gratitude and personal satisfaction. And then anything where I can move in nature, so whether it's skiing, diving, trying kite surfing now, anything that gets me moving is always good.
Sounds like a fantastic balance to maybe some of the more stressful days at work, particularly the yoga piece. Could be some good application there. So, and thank you for sharing that. So let's talk about Angelini Ventures. And obviously there are other corporate venture funds around. What do you see as making Angelini Ventures really different to other corporate venture funds?
Yeah, I always joke that, I think we should have a tagline that says this is not a corporate fund, a corporate venture fund. And the reason for saying that is that, Angelini Ventures was built with a very clear premise, which is we believe healthcare is going to change dramatically. We believe there's going to be some fundamental shifts in how healthcare transforms. We also believe it's not just going to happen overnight with some magic trick. It's going to be a complex process that will take years. And we also feel that there aren't so many players, and we should actually have more, large, Fortune 500 companies that believe it and put, enough capital behind it. So even though we're not one of those, giants in terms of, our position in the market, we have made an outsized bet, right? Because a 300 million fund for a company that has a 2 billion turnaround is an outsized bet. And the reason why it's an outsized bet is that we're really looking at very long-term strategic bets. We're not here, as many corporate funds, to look for something that could be an add-on or a bolt-on to our existing businesses, not directly at least. We're looking at those founders and companies that will do something meaningful, that over time will become meaningful businesses. And that also means that we're patient we're very financially driven, so we act like a financial VC. We don't back something that is just strategic and a great dream but does not have the right numbers.
Yeah.
But we're looking at things that in 10, 20 years could become sustainable, standalone, impactful pillars for a group like Angelini, right? So there is a corporate strategy element, which is to find things that over time could be meaningful for us, but it's not that short-term driven view, and it's not with the typical governance of having to have someone in an existing operational company say, yes, we are okay with that investment. It's really a standalone VC that works directly with the holding company, and specifically with the CEO of the Angelini Group is in our investment committee, and we make decisions together.
Yeah, and that, as you outlined, that long-term focus is really clear. But I guess we have to acknowledge we are right now in the midst of quite uncertain economic times. So why launch it now? Why is now the right time?
So it's actually a fantastic time to launch a venture fund. I mean, if you look at venture funds whose vintage was just after a crisis, there are some of those that perform the best. So, I mean, this will sound definitely harsh to a startup founder, and I've been on the other side, but very, transparently speaking, we can now sit down and talk to startups for quite a while. We're not rushed into a deal, right? There is a, there is a recognition of that. The valuations are reasonable, but beyond the more, I would say, cynical, almost cynical aspects of the fact that you're in a good position as a fund, I think there are also some very value-driven aspects, which is businesses that are onto something that is not a short-term bubble, that is not just a fancy pitch deck with some great people on an advisory board, etc., but who are onto something real and concrete. They'll still raise very good capital from good sources. If you look at the fundraising environment for VCs this year, it's been really interesting. It's been a bimodal distribution of how long it took them to fundraise. The ones that are strong VCs that have great track record actually raised capital faster than usual. The ones that are, first time raising with so-and-so track record, many of them are not closing. So that means that there's a stronger syndicate of really good VCs who have been doing this for 20, 30 years, who are ready to put capital into good companies with good founders, but also doing very deep due diligence and asking very good questions. So I think it's actually a really good time to build companies that will make an impact in the next 10, 20 years. And we find that we're building very good syndicates. We can, collaborate with funds in a very open manner. We can take our time to really understand in depth the startup, get to know everyone on the team, get to know, what their business is about. And also, I mean, an old friend who's been doing this for 50 years or so told me, if they're raising money, it's because they're imperfect, and you just have to understand whether the imperfections are something you can live with and you can help with. Right. And so you can get down to that depth of conversation of understanding these imperfections, seeing also how the founders react, say, oh, thank you, that's a really interesting idea. Let's work on it together. Or whether they're a bit too sort of standoffish and proud and, and don't want to kind of understand and shape the business in a direction that will help them to grow.
Yeah, that makes sense. And of course, we always have these sort of short-term economic fluctuations, but I think what is clear is that you're looking for long-term sustainable solutions that you can work with. And I guess in that sense, there's never a bad time to do this. Let's talk a bit about the team that you have at Angelini Ventures. And I want to just come back to you for a moment. We heard about your background and this incredibly diverse career that you've had that's brought you to Angelini Ventures. So what do you think is the key thing that you bring to the team, and how do you see this complementing the team that you work with around you?
Yeah, we're very proud of even though we're a young kid on the block, but we're very proud already, immensely proud of the diversity of backgrounds and of our team. So starting from your question about me, so from a personal character trait perspective, I'm very much a person that, is a people person, a vision, long-term vision person, an optimist by nature. So I'm on that sort of, side of the spectrum. From a more core competency background, I can sort of debunk when somebody talks about AI or tech, I can go relatively deep, having run a lot of teams there, because we tend to pepper a little bit too much the world with AI these days. So obviously the tech part, the fact of having I think, my trajectory in life has helped me to see healthcare from the different perspectives, right? From the hospital, the patient, the pharma company, and then with Health Catalyst also a little bit sort of the broader, payer provider space. So I tend to look at the problem from different directions. As for the team, I mean, we really complement each other in so many ways. I mean, Paolo brings a fantastic background in hardcore science, neuroscience. He was at Harvard doing some seminal work in stem cells. And when we work on brain health, I feel like we have a stellar team already, not just with him, but with other people on the team. He also, Paolo and I work really well together because he complements me in being much more analytical, fact-driven, track record-driven, focused on those aspects, so we can really bounce ideas off each other, and we have a good mutual trust and mutual respect with him, but with the team as a whole, to kind of leverage each other's strengths and weaknesses, I would say. Then we have, I call her Gabby. We all call her Gabby, Gabriela Manrique in Boston. Amazing. She's a generalist. She doesn't have, because the problem with us scientists is we can tend to be a little bit, sidetracked and get too excited by the science. She comes from, from amazing places like F Prime. She's worked years at F Prime, but she's also had really hands-on growth experience, especially in SaaS models. So she brought Toast, the company Toast, from 15 employees to something like 1,000 employees in IPO. And she's worked at Gazelle. She's worked at, she was kind of the F Prime person in residence to help companies grow and succeed. And then she was at O'Reilly as a CFO of the group and also their venture group, etc. So she brings, really strong financial and operational background and global experience across, Asia, Europe, and US. And we have Thomas based in Copenhagen, who worked at UCB Ventures. He was been working both in venture capital and business development, both digital and life sciences. Filippo, who is a Fortune 30 under 30 in venture capital in Italy. He was actually behind the first unicorn in Italy when he was at Tim Ventures. He's also worked at Rocket Internet. So he's done a lot of work being a 30 under 30. We have Fabrizio Callisti, who is joining us as medical director with great background both in pharma as well as a psychiatrist by training. And we have some exciting hires coming up that I can't name yet, but we're very excited about.
Watch this space. Fantastic. It sounds like a great team, but it also strikes me as a very diverse team in terms of geographic location. And you mentioned a few of those there. So was this a conscious decision to kind of hire in different global locations versus central headquarters?
Absolutely. And thankfully in a post-pandemic world, it was more kind of accepted and acceptable. But I think it's a core strength that we have. We want to hire people in places that are hubs of what we do, and where they are already active members of those hubs. And it's a win-win situation. It makes us very strong in terms of talent attraction. I have to say both Paolo and I have been humbled by the level of interest for the positions that we have open and we're opening. It also means that we enter, from an investment perspective, we enter a market hitting the ground running, right? If we hire somebody, let's say in Berlin, that has been active for years in that space, they bring on their experience, their network, their expertise. We can organize events there and quickly get to know someone. And when we enter a due diligence for a company, people get surprised by how much sort of local insider knowledge we already have. We've also had to balance it, of course. I mean, there's so many articles being published about how to make hybrid work. So we balance it by meeting every 2 months, usually in Rome, in our beautiful headquarters in Rome. Usually nobody says no when you invite them for, to spend a week in Rome. So yes, we do have that competitive advantage as well. I always joke, with no offense to Chicago, that it beats Chicago. So. But no, it's been a great ride, and it also helps, I think, in the talent attraction. People speak about diversity. I think when they get on the job interviews with 4 or 5 of us, they realize that, diversity for us is just a way of being. It's not a slogan. We couldn't be more diverse in terms of, our backgrounds and all of that.
That's great. And obviously you're based in Singapore. I presume you enjoy being in Singapore, but you must travel around quite a bit. Do you have a favorite place to go outside of Singapore?
Yeah, so we're actually, I mean, we're literally post-pandemic life. So we actually spend about 50% of our time in Italy because, of my role and everything. I do spend a lot of time working, elbow to elbow with Paolo and the team. So we spend about 50% of the time in Italy, and we have a base there. And the other 50%, here in Singapore or in Asia in general. Favorite place, rather very hard. I think the fondest recent memories I have, just to mention a place that is not maybe on everybody's map, is Sumatra in Indonesia. A fantastic location that is not so well known, Lake Toba, one of the oldest volcanic lakes in the world. Beautiful.
Fantastic. We'll probably do a whole separate podcast on Sumatra. I've not been myself, but I'd love to hear more about it at some point. And you touched on there, obviously, you've got the Italian heritage, the Italian roots. You're based in Singapore. Those are both markets that are quite hot in terms of startups. Where do you see the similarities and where do you see the differences between those markets?
That's a good question. So Italy is been really, really late to the game, but it's been very interesting because exactly like probably just in the last 2 to 3 years, it's become a hot market. I think some recent statistics put Milan as like the third fastest growing in Europe. And there's a strong angel network, the first unicorns. There's a lot happening. I think the pandemic has helped a lot the relocation also of smart Italians around the world who said, you know what, I could actually live, in the country that I love and I want to live in, and still, build a global business, etc. To your question of comparing Singapore and Italy, the first thing that comes to mind are certainly differences. I think unless you spend time living and traveling and here in Asia, I think for a lot of people who might be listening from Western, whatever Western means nowadays, but a European or North American country, it's hard to imagine how much the world has changed. I mean, sometimes when you travel back from Asia to Europe, you feel like Europe is a few years behind when you talk about actual business models and startups and how, like something as simple as a super app has just not happened yet, right, in Europe or US, right? I mean, if you think of Grab in Asia and what you can do on Grab, which is literally anything from, buying your food to shopping to deliveries to nowadays payments, healthcare is coming up. I mean, there's so much happening on these super apps in China and in Asia at large. So there is definitely a disconnect in how rapidly things have shifted in certain segments in Asia. And I think for our world, for the world of healthcare, it's fascinating how emerging economies, when it comes to brick and mortar, can still be a little bit like what we imagine of an emerging economy. So still having to improve infrastructure, etc. But when it comes to digital, they're years ahead, right? I mean, whether it's the payment industry or the delivery systems or just the way people live digitally. So the differences definitely come first in my mind. The difference, vice versa, is that, for example, Singapore is still a relatively risk-averse culture, so you'll find it quite vibrant in businesses that are easy to back, right, where there is a clear consumer traction, and you have very obvious consumer attraction curves, and then you put money and you kind of know that you're going to make money. It's still relatively risk-averse when it comes to out-of-the-box innovation or areas that require very long-term capital to make long-term bets. It's a challenge that Singapore wants to embrace and is trying to do something about. But the first rounds are easier to come by than the later rounds, and so on. So that's the difference. Where I would say in Europe there's a long-term sort of tradition of venture capital that takes very long-term bets, and there's also a little bit of that national pride, whether it's in France or UK or Germany, and now a little bit in Italy with government-backed VCs and just a VC ecosystem that will kind of stay the course and back a company for several rounds until they can really make it and try to keep it in Italy. What's in common? I mean, I think the aging aspect is very similar between Italy and Singapore. So trying to tackle anything that can make start resolving aging. I always find it puzzling that, I always say if a startup could build anything that costs as much as a dishwasher and makes our great parents' life better, whatever it is, safer, more compliant with drugs, but somehow we haven't cracked it yet. So I think that's a huge untapped potential, right? To build some technology that can really help the elderly age gracefully and their caregivers be less worried about them. So I think that's something that there's in common. And then I would say in general, the healthcare challenge commonalities are much greater than people think. There's this really interesting graph showing that, yes, 10, 20 years ago, a country like Indonesia, for example, had, the typical emerging economy problems. Now the problems are identical to Europe, right? Cardiovascular, is the number one killer. So it's been completely flattened out. Like there is no difference in what are the top killers in healthcare in a so-called emerging economy in Asia.
Yeah, no, it's a great point. And I guess one of the challenges is as we address more diseases earlier in life, we have aging populations, many more comorbidities, and exactly the kind of challenge that you outlined. But I also like the point you make about technology sort of coming from Asia to other markets. I think we see that trend outside of healthcare as well. So definitely one to watch. Let's take a look forward. And I know you sort of, almost at the start of this journey with Angelini Ventures, but can you talk about what you're looking forward to in the next 5 years? Anything you're particularly excited about?
Yeah, so we, the way we built Angelini Ventures, we're a little bit ahead of the first day. We already have 8 investments in our portfolio. And so even though the public launch was recently, we have had quite a bit of work behind the scenes, and we do think a lot about long-term strategy. We're definitely very excited about, the strategic impact that we can have, at least in some verticals. 2 verticals that we're very excited about are brain health and women's health.
Yeah.
And they're both verticals where, well, let's start from brain health. Brain health, and even more specifically, for example, neurodevelopmental disorders, so the first 10, 20 years of life, we feel there's such a potential, especially because our approach is across medical device, digital life sciences, to leverage this diverse approach to make a strong multiplier effect for an even stronger impact. What I mean by that is, if you, for example, there's amazing potential to diagnose autism, dyslexia, just to give 2 examples, much earlier than we do right now. And we have a huge gap in diagnosing these diseases. We diagnose them way too late. Now, if you diagnose them earlier, and there are some great clinical studies showing you could diagnose autism as early as 2 years of age, you completely alter the path of these kids, because you find out early that there is a problem. It means the brain is still extremely plastic. You can then intervene in ways that are less disruptive with digital therapeutics and behavioral health, et cetera, so that you never even see the full spectrum of the disease that you would have seen, that you see today, because it's caught way too late, right? So there's really, a scientific premise as to why getting in earlier and then modifying it earlier, you have a better outcome overall. And for us, what's exciting is that there are startups trying to tackle this at every stage, right? So there are startups that are trying to diagnose early. There are startups that are doing really cool tech to be therapeutic, sort of digital therapeutics interventions that can alter it earlier. There are startups that are innovating in the biotech space for these diseases. So we're excited about that. We're excited that you could take some verticals and kind of invest in an ecosystem of startups that are each doing their thing, and they should do, right? That's why we're not a traditional corporate VC. We don't want them to distract them from what they're doing. We want to back them, support them, get these founders to work together and talk to each other. So I think that's incredibly exciting. Of course, COVID has put a spotlight on mental health. We recently invested in Serenis. We find the founders amazing. They're doing something that looks easy, which is psychotherapy online. A lot of companies do it. But they do it in a really meaningful way. They take top psychotherapists, they match the patient to the psychotherapist in the right way. There's really good sort of outcomes and good experiences for the patients. And you just make it accessible, and you have impact today on something that is affecting so many people. And we also hope that it shifts, there's a cultural shift needed, which is to get in earlier and earlier and earlier. So get in not when you have a problem and it's 1 a.m. and you feel that you really need help, but when you just feel a little bit off balance and, you think that it would be good, to speak to someone and figure out what is putting you off balance. So we're excited about those two spaces specifically, and brain health in general. We think, this multimodal approach can have fantastic impact. We're just starting to think about women's health, something that is also very close to the Angelini world, because of we have a consumer goods company that produces hygienic pads for women. It also produces diapers for babies. So the entire maternity space and women's health space for us is very interesting. The reason why it's interesting, and we have one of our board members, Jessica Federer, former CDO of Bayer, and now launched a women's health fund. She always reminds us, women's health is more than women body parts, right? The problem with men investing in women's health is that they think of fertility, they think of, tracking your period and all those things. Actually, women's health is the fact that they suffer more from autoimmune diseases, that they are not enrolled in trials as often. There's so many aspects of women's health. They live longer and they get affected by dementia more, etc. So women's health is a very undervalued space. There are disease areas like endometriosis, which have just been completely undervalued by the market, mainly because it was a market made by men, the way pharma invested in the past, etc. So those are two areas that, we're very excited about.
Fantastic. And big shout out to Jessica. I met her when she was at Bayer and I've tracked her work since. You're right. She's doing some amazing stuff. And what you outlined there about brain health as well, there's a lot we don't know about the brain, as you know, but what we do know is it is almost like a muscle with this plasticity that you can train it and retrain it if you get in there early. So it seems like a fantastic ambition. And any sort of beyond that, any emerging healthcare trends or technologies that you think are really interesting or promising, maybe some of the earlier stuff?
I mean, to me, what's personally exciting is the technologies that drastically reduce access barriers, right? So I feel like, we spent a lot of the 20th century and the beginning of the 21st century getting excited rightly about what technology and science can do. But we also became so excited that a lot of it is very expensive and very inaccessible, very hard to replicate, very hard to scale, right? So if I think of some of the most sophisticated, cell and gene therapies that I was involved in, I mean, when we produced them, they were great, but they were impossible to scale. And that has, then become evident as some of these biotechs, had to, grow. And now we finally have, some very interesting companies that try to address those gaps. So I'm particularly excited by the fact that now, a small device can really accelerate the pace of diagnosis, having a family with a healthcare worker that might have just gotten 1 month of training, be able to get, early diagnosis or early therapy, early intervention on a lot of diseases. So to me, those are the most exciting things to emerge, what you can do at home and what you can do in a simple setting, what you can do, for example, in women's health, we're just starting to see exciting technologies looking at what does period blood or vaginal discharge tell about a woman's health, and how much could that take us further in early diagnostics, disease monitoring, and therefore empowering the next wave of biotechs that wants to tackle those, those areas, or technologies that that allow quick and easy stethoscope-like, but much more in-depth understanding of a baby. Especially for remote areas, etc. So those are, personally, are the ones that I'm most excited about. I think something that will take a lot longer is then a venture ecosystem, a venture capital ecosystem, and an industry ecosystem that also enables that to then reach all those places, right? Because we still don't have a very strong ecosystem that that gets us to those places. Like I'm thinking of companies like Reach 52 that is doing amazing work in Kenya, Indonesia, Cambodia, etc. To really market shape, like to create a market where it didn't exist because people never even saw a doctor or a pharmacist in their village. So I think that will take time. That's like my personal passion. But those are the trends that I'm more excited about in the long term.
That's a great point. And into what you were saying there, this real influx of diagnostics and monitoring that's putting things in the hands of the person, integrating into their daily routines. But also, as you outline, health equity, equality, access, that there's a lot of challenges there as well that I certainly hope we can address. So Let me bring it right back to the next 12 months. As we're recording this, we're December 2022. We're almost into 2023. It's been, as we all know, a kind of crazy couple of years with COVID and everything going on. So could you dare to make any predictions for next year, 2023, if there's anything in particular you're most excited about?
I think, the area that I hope will emerge in 23 is that when you mentioned the word digital therapeutics, anybody who's been there long enough and has invested often, starts kind of shivering or trembling because they got a little bit burnt in the early days by investing in companies that, took a lot of money and didn't deliver in terms of revenues and so on, or approvals. I think 23 could be the first turning point, at least in some countries, where some companies emerge saying, hey, actually, I got it approved and I actually sold my product and I had an impact on people. So I think, since you're asking for a very short-term window, I think that's a realistic prediction is that next year, hopefully, when you sit around at the conference, at least a fraction of the people at the table will be, a little bit more bullish about digital therapeutics than they've been in the past.
That's a great ambition. We should reconnect in December 2023 and see how far we've shifted.
Sounds good.
not entirely up to us, but
but
let's see where we've got to. Well, look, I think that's been a fantastic coverage of your journey, what you're doing at Angelini Ventures. I've really enjoyed speaking to you today, Elia. So thank you so much for joining me, and I hope all of you who've been listening have enjoyed this as much as I have. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Paul. It was great talking to you.